Before we get into this video, I have some very important news. Next Saturday, at the times on screen for different time zones, I am uploading the most important video I have ever made. Please come along and check it out. It's a massive update with some incredibly important news that I've been wanting to share for months. For now though, let's get into the video. The Great Discovery is my favourite Thomas movie. That might sound strange. A lot of people would choose Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, with its epic scope, fantastic soundtrack, and dark story. Many would choose Blue Mountain Mystery, with its character development and fan service. Many would choose The Adventure Begins, for being a passionate and faithful retelling of the stories that brought Thomas into the world. But I choose The Great Discovery, a movie from a mediocre time to be a Thomas fan, with one new character, no villain, and what many would say is a boring story. What does The Great Discovery have? Today we'll be finding out. My name is The Thomas Cynic, please subscribe to boost my ego, and let's talk about the best Thomas movie ever made. Obvious disclaimer, this is all my opinion. It's very firmly held opinion, but it's opinion nonetheless. Disclaimer done, let's get into this. I know I've said that like 3 times now, I promise this is actually where we start the video. I love The Great Discovery, but in order to be fair, I'm going to acknowledge its flaws before I begin gushing over this thing. As with any Thomas movie, there are things wrong with this one. Let's talk briefly about some things this movie could have done better. I have very few problems with The Great Discovery, but if I had to single out one flaw, it would probably be the songs. I'm just going to say it, this movie didn't need to be a musical, and it wasn't a musical at heart. Some wouldn't even consider it a musical in the first place, but I think it did try a bit too hard to pull a Calling All Engines and put 3 or 4 bangers in its soundtrack. And while I love the background score in this movie, we'll talk more about that later, the songs are objectively quite poor. In a Thomas movie, songs should do at least one of 3 things. They should either advance the plot, like I Want to Go Home in Journey Beyond Sodor, cement a key idea in the minds of the audience, like Trying to Do Things Better in Calling All Engines, or be a bit of a break in the tension of a story, see the rendition of Really Useful Engine in Thomas and the Magic Railroad. When I look at the songs of The Great Discovery though, I don't see much of any of these 3 things happening. Thomas and James Are Racing certainly doesn't do any of those, and on the latest rewatch I thought it was quite repetitive, despite having a somewhat catchy beat. There's a Job for Everyone, again, doesn't advance the plot, doesn't highlight a key theme, and it isn't a break in tension. Again, it is catchy, but a catchy song alone doesn't make a good song. Song-wise, it's good. Plot-wise, it's bad. Where Oh Where Is Thomas does somewhat cement a key idea in the minds of the audience, but the song itself is boring, and I couldn't remember any of the words. Plot-wise it's good, song-wise it's bad. And then we have our engine roll call, slightly modified but nothing special, and then Thomas You're the Leader. This one is definitely the best of the movie, but it suffers from coming after the generic engine roll call, and again, doing none of the 3 elements I mentioned. None of the songs in this movie feel like they have a real solid purpose, except for Where Oh Where Is Thomas, which song-wise is the worst. Calling All Engines is much worse than this movie overall, but one thing it did do better were the songs. Busy doesn't do any of the Magic 3 rules, but is ridiculously catchy. Trying to Do Things Better really cements an idea, and is both a break and an increase in tension, and together wraps up the core themes of the movie, and ends a mediocre plot very well. The Great Discovery can't claim the same, unfortunately. My only other real problem with this movie is that even here, Sharon Miller's writing techniques were beginning to take hold. There were quite a few rhymes here. In some cases it works, the Thomas is Found sequence is how rhyming should be used in Thomas, but other times it feels almost as forced as it does in the likes of Misty Island Rescue. For example,
I am brave and I am strong, I'll get to the wharf and it won't take long.
Although it wasn't as frequent as in the early CGI specials, it still bugs me, because even in an utterly fantastic movie, the best of the bunch in fact, Miller was still behind the scenes, and although trying her best to make it a good baby movie, not really succeeding in making good Thomas movies. As I say though, both of these problems I have are more nitpicks than massive contentious issues. With them out the way, I want to focus on the 99.9% of this movie that I love. First of all, I think that one reason I'm so drawn to The Great Discovery is that it really is one of a kind. There is no other Thomas movie quite like this one. There are three main reasons why it stands alone. First off, scale. This movie is easily the best in a franchise when it comes to scale. You can typically group Thomas movies, both good and bad, into two categories. First of all, we have the grand, sprawling stories which try to be big and are often marketed as Thomas's most significant adventure yet. Those ones are Tatma, Calling All Engines to an extent, Misty Island Rescue, Blue Mountain Mystery, Lost Treasure, The Great Race, Journey Beyond Sodor, and Bwubba. And then you have the stories which are trying to be more personal, much more about characters and their individual situations. See Hero of the Rails, Day of the Diesels, King of the Railway, Tale of the Brave. But The Great Discovery strikes a perfect balance between these two categories. It's simultaneously grand and large scale, but also personal, focused, small scale. It does this by taking something exciting and epic, an ancient long lost town being uncovered, and tracking the effect it has on our main characters. So first of all, this movie has the perfect scale. It's very grand, but very grounded. Secondly, we see everybody. Well, not quite everybody here, but still, a lot of characters make either fleeting or major appearances. The Skarloey engines, the pack, the season 6 and 7 characters, Bill and Ben, everybody except for the Little Westerners. This was an expansive movie in a way that no other quite was. It felt like a celebration of all these characters, coming together for something truly grand. That's where I feel that the Thomas's greatest adventure yet trope falls flat. Often, Bwubba, Journey Beyond Sodor, it only really focuses on Thomas, maybe a couple of new characters, and not really on any of his friends that he interacts with. The show is called Thomas and Friends, not Thomas's Great Adventures. Journey Beyond Sodor managed this a bit better because it actually used Thomas's distance from his friends as a strong plot device, but The Great Discovery does it even better than that. The copious amounts of characters only add to the isolation you feel when Thomas is seen alone. It looks almost a bit weird. Not seeing him surrounded by others in a variety of bright liveries is just different from the rest of the movie. Characters en masse were used really well in this movie, and only it and JBS ever really did that. We also need to talk about Pierce Brosnan. He's my favourite narrator ever, hands down. Yes, he's a bit slow and not super actiony, but neither was Ringo, who is my second favourite narrator ever, big coincidence. Brosnan does both the general narration and the characters really well. There was real thought put into how he wanted each one to sound, unlike with Michael Brandon, who span a 50-50 wheel between really whiny and really crotchety. Brosnan has a very tight kind of voice, if you know what I mean. He doesn't portray each character by making them wildly different, but rather by accenting and nuancing his tones while he narrates for each one. Duncan, for example, isn't obviously in-your-face Scottish, but it comes across completely in the way he says his R's alone. Brosnan was a master. Also, he is James Bond, which doesn't hurt. One thing I should mention here is that two other Thomas movies are often brought up when discussing The Great Discovery, and at first glance, they seem to contradict what I'm saying about how one of a kind it is. Those two movies are Day of the Diesels and Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. Both feature some of the same beats as The Great Discovery. Thomas, or Percy, feeling replaced by a new engine and looking for gratification, but ultimately failing and then redeeming themselves. But The Great Discovery, in my opinion, is better than both Day of the Diesels, and yes, better than Lost Treasure. Day of the Diesels simply does this idea very poorly, with bad morals and an out-of-character Percy. It's nowhere near as exciting. Lost Treasure, on the other hand, does it very well, and it is my second favourite Thomas movie of all time. However, the reason The Great Discovery trumps it for me is because it's more personal. Lost Treasure focuses a lot on Thomas's dynamic with the Fat Controller, and how that brings him into disgrace, but in this movie, it's more about Thomas and friends, which for me is more powerful. Lost Treasure was fantastic and incredibly epic, but The Great Discovery packs more emotional punch. Here's something you don't hear every day. I think that The Great Discovery is one of only 3 Thomas movies that get Thomas himself perfect, the other 2 being Lost Treasure and Blue Mountain Mystery. The Great Discovery is the one that delves deepest into what makes Thomas tick, and it's largely because of this that makes it such a perfect finale to the full model series. Thomas is so complex here. Let's dive in. Remember what I said earlier, that this story doesn't have a villain? Well, that's not really true. Thomas is the villain of this story, and Thomas is the hero. I've mentioned this before, but I wrote a short piece on his character on the wiki over a year ago. Here's what I said about this movie and Thomas. Open quote. It sets him as flawed, but not as a total jerk. The entire thing is about his fight for friendship. At the start, he's just living his life. He's racing with James, getting screwed over by Duncan, the usual. Obviously, he finds Great Waterton next, and he loves the leadership that comes with it. However, it starts to take control of his head. That will be important later. Then, Stanley arrives. Suddenly, Thomas sees a threat not to his leadership, but to his friendship. Then, Thomas has an accident and Stanley takes over at Great Waterton. Thomas's leadership is gone. He fights to get it back, and in doing so, loses his friendship. Of course, he goes through his running away thing, and he and Stanley have a whole dynamic redemption. The last lines in the movie are, he had wanted to be the leader of the track, but we're all leaders of the track, and he could not have felt happier. It's a beautiful, simple moral that friendship is more important than leadership, but it provides wonderful development for Thomas. End quote. I stand by what I said because although such a moral might seem even simplistic, Thomas is the perfect character to tell it with. Many specials simply focus on Thomas because he's the titular character, whereas his place in this special didn't feel like it was out of obligation. This movie being centered on Thomas first and foremost is also the perfect reason why Stanley didn't need to be super in-depth. Stanley isn't a character, he's a plot device, a catalyst for Thomas's behaviour. And while that might sound like I'm being negative, I'm really not. Stanley is a plot device, yes, but he's a plot device that does everything he needs to do, and some. It's not just him too. The discovery of Great Waterton, James's insensitivity, Duncan's anti-heroics, it's all there to show us more about Thomas. This is a Thomas special, in the truest sense of the word. Once more, Thomas is the villain. In Act 2, he is outright antagonistic. This, along with Season 2 Thomas, is pretty much his nadir, his lowest low. Thomas can't bear to be outshined. That's something that's at the root of pretty much all his flaws in the model series. And when he screws up due to his own hubris, he screws up really bad, causing an accident the likes of which we've never seen caused by a good guy before, really. This movie was not afraid to show Thomas as a jerk, and it makes his subsequent redemption that much more satisfying. In Act 1, you're rooting for Thomas. In Act 2, you're rooting for Stanley. And in Act 3, you're rooting for both of them. That almost implants the Great Discovery's moral into the viewer, which is masterful writing. And it's all down to the portrayal of our favourite little engine, or in the middle of the movie, our least favourite. While a lot of what makes this special so great comes down to characterization, scale, and its uniqueness, big things like that, there are also several smaller details that I think it would be remiss to leave out. First off, music. The soundtrack of this movie is an absolute banger. There are so many fantastic tunes and ditties here. This is a cut above typical hit music, which to begin with I don't think is too bad. We have to talk about the model work in this movie. In my opinion, this is the most beautifully modelled production of Thomas. Full stop there, by the way. Yes, even better than Season 5, which is the best of the bunch for me. This production oozes so much creativity, and so many details that it's almost unbelievable. Let's look at one frame of this movie, just one. Look how layered the model work is here. We have a bridge in the foreground, and straight away there's intention in that. We didn't need that bridge, and if this was another movie, we likely wouldn't have gotten it. But what this seemingly insignificant bridge does is to increase the feeling of secrecy by making the frame more enclosed, as do the bushes and weeds on either side of it. And that's only one element. We have houses, a ruined tower, another bridge, dead trees, a random tinder that a very strong fan story was made out of, shops, and more besides. Not only that, but some of the houses here have authentic English Tudor house markings on them. Kudos, guys. Kudos. Another thing I want to spend some time on is the action sequences that this movie brings to the table. There are three main ones: the collapse of Rolling River Bridge, the insane tower crash, and the mine chase ending in the ravine jump. All three are utterly fantastic, of course, but for me the tower crash is the greatest. For one reason. It's used masterfully in the story. This isn't a crash that exists to be a crash. Crashes that exist for their own sake aren't always bad, but this one was used in the story as, again, a plot device to form a rift between Thomas and his friends. It creates a very tangible consequence. He loses all of his reputation and standing with both his friends, the Fat Controller, and even himself. Thomas feels terrible after this. Really terrible. I've said this before, but that shot of his friends cold shouldering him is really kind of depressing. Why? Because he deserves it. The crash wasn't just Thomas messing up, it was Thomas messing up and losing everything that was important to him, but that he didn't realise was important to him at the time. The crash isn't a crash alone, it's an emotional beat, a moral beat, and a somewhat relatable beat. The demolition effects, both here and in the bridge scene, are fantastic too, of course. What else to talk about? Well, let's talk about the secondary characters. We've talked a lot about Thomas, but I really feel obliged to talk about two secondaries in particular, both some of my favourites in the show. The first is James. He's done fantastically. He's wonderfully snooty, insensitive, and he shines even in a fairly minor role. Secondly, Duncan. This is my favourite Duncan ever. He's not outright angry and tantrum kicking like he was in season 4, he's just so passive-aggressive antagonistic. It's wonderful, he's a great catalyst and it kind of kickstarts the whole adventure. Hit Era Duncan was great generally, but Brosnan and the writing team gave him a very memorable performance here. Basically, this movie did pretty much everything right. It wasn't a big, sweeping movie with big, sweeping successes alone. It also paid attention to the seemingly small things that other movies either forget or thrust in carelessly. This movie had the details right, and that is something I massively respect and love. The Great Discovery is not just a great movie, it's a great finale. I think that when we watch Thomas movies, it's very easy to isolate them from their context. We think of them just as a movie, and forget where they came in the history of the show. The Great Discovery's place in the timeline is very important, as the last full model production of Thomas. This movie was the end of an era, and it was the perfect end of an era. Let's go over 4 reasons why. First off, everyone got a look in. We've already been over this. Almost everyone was brought out for a big occasion, really making the event feel grand and important. Secondly, the world continued to be built. We see so many new locations in this movie, Great Waterton being the most significant one of course. The history of the world wasn't blindly shoved aside in favour of action sequences, see The Great Race, or toddler compatibility, see Calling All Engines. As a finale, this movie could have only focused on bringing everyone out, only on its model work, and it would still be fine. But it had the goal to give us a solidly strong story too. Thirdly, this movie is a real homage. We've already talked extensively about the tower crash, but if I had one more thing to add about it, it would be that it's very Mitten-esque, almost a tribute to him. It's one of the few hit-era practical effects that feels classic. There are other good ones, lots of them in fact, but they do all feel hit. Slow-mo is often used, and while it doesn't hurt as much as it does in the lightweight CGI atmosphere, it doesn't quite have that classic flair. This crash, however, takes the slow-mo and makes it work, because of the style of the accident. The focal point is very large, it's the entire tower, not just a single engine. As a result, we get a beautiful impact and topple with a focus and then a pull out to see the action in the entirety of the frame. Finally, this movie's ending is a true ending. The finale of the finale, if you will. This movie has a wonderful resolution. Thomas, the hero and villain of his story, is there with his friends, quite literally from the oldest to the newest. The music soars, the atmosphere is fantastic, and if I'm honest, I would have given anything for the show to have ended here. I love what Brenner did, I love what Ark did, I love what Michael White did, I love what everybody who cared during the CGI series did. But I would sacrifice it all for the show to have closed its doors here. Thomas is a franchise that I don't think will ever truly recover from not knowing when to stop. I think it will improve from what it is now, but I don't think it'll ever be the same again. Of course, you can't blame the folks who made good money from this movie wanting to continue, they didn't know. But as good as this movie is, it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. The show should have stopped here. And that is what shows me, above everything else, that this movie is worth loving. They could have stopped here. And that says it all, really. Thank you for watching this video. I really loved making this one. We've talked about so many reasons that this movie rocks, from its uniqueness to Thomas's centre stage role, from the model work and the music, to its beautiful but bittersweet finality. This movie deserves to be talked about, so leave a comment telling me what you think of it. I got this far without making a stupid, overused joke that has no right to be as quoted as it is. So I'm going to cave in under the pressure of what would happen to me if I didn't include it.
Welcome, Stanley!
If you enjoyed this video, chances are you'll enjoy my big chunker video on the defense of the hit era. Watch that by clicking the element here. Remember to catch my update next week. It's somewhat bittersweet, but on the whole, I would class it as good news. Thank you for watching, This has been the Thomas Cynic, and until the next time, have a good one.